This is the B2 section of the January 2013 paper. So, the first question is about gases in the atmosphere, and specifically it's about carbon dioxide being added to the atmosphere when fossil fuels are burnt. The question says, describe how else carbon dioxide can be added to the atmosphere. So this question is basically identifying a couple of processes that can do this. The main one is respiration, because in respiration living organisms take oxygen and glucose and produce energy, and the products are carbon dioxide and water. So respiration is one of the main answers that you should put for this. You can also have got a mark if you'd have put the decomposition or decomposing or decay can also add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from microbes or bacteria, fungi, plants or animals. They've also given you a mark if you'd have put animals breathing in or breathing out carbon dioxide, but that answer is not as good as identifying that it's respiration that causes this carbon dioxide to be produced. Second question is, what process removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? Well, this has got to be the opposite process of respiration, so it is photosynthesis, the process that plants carry out. Next question is about sulfur dioxide being added to the atmosphere as fossil fuels are burned, and the question is, what are the consequences, which means what are the problems associated with sulfur dioxide getting into the atmosphere. And the main consequence is acid rain, because the sulfur dioxide will dissolve in rainwater and form sulfuric acid. And then the second mark for this, because this is a 2-mark question, it's the consequence, and then just explaining a bit about what the consequence of acid rain is. So you could have had a whole load of things for this. You could have had weathering, erosion on buildings, increase the rate of rusting, corrosion of metals, damage to crops, death of plants, death of fish, acidification of lakes, acidification of soil, damage to the leaves, wearing away limestone, anything like that would have given you your second mark. And the last question, air can be chemically tested to monitor sulfur dioxide levels. Write down one other way of monitoring sulfur dioxide levels. What this question really is saying is that the question in simple terms is, what is a way of monitoring a pollutant? That's really what the question is asking. And one of the best answers you could have put is an indicator species. So an indicator species is a species which thrives when a particular pollutant is present. The example the exam board have given in this question as a sort of an ideal answer is lichen, as an example of an indicator species. You could have also tested the pH of rainwater as a way of monitoring the amount of sulfur dioxide as well, but indicator species is probably the best answer for that. Next question is about efficiency in a food chain. It's to calculate the efficiency for each transfer. So the transfers occur here. So that's a clue in terms of how to answer this question. So you're looking at the efficiency of each transfer. So for the first one, you should have done 4,000 divided by 42,500. So that would have given you the efficiency of A, and you would have got an answer of 9.4 or 9%. When you do B, again, you're looking at the energy that comes out compared to the energy that went in. So you do 800 divided by 4,000, and you'd get an answer then of 20%. And for the last one, you do 150 divided by 800, and you get an answer of 18.8 or 19%. You had to get all 3 right to get 2 marks. The next question then is, which energy transfer is the least efficient? It doesn't particularly matter which letter that you put. What matters is the second part of this, which is suggest why this energy transfer is least efficient. This question is basically asking, how is energy lost through a food chain? So one of the main processes is energy is lost through egestion. A couple of these you should be able to sort of work out from previous questions in this paper. So respiration is a major process that living organisms have to carry out. So energy is used up from the glucose, for example, in respiration, so some energy is lost there. Energy can be lost through heat, because animals are moving around as they're alive, so they're active, they're moving. You would get a mark for that. You could also get a mark through it's lost through excretion as well. Some questions in some exam papers based on this topic of idea of losing energy through the food chain sometimes will allow you to get a mark for through urine or through feces, but excretion is the more technical term for this. There are only 4 stages in this food chain. Explain in terms of energy transfer why there cannot be any more stages. And if you look at what happens to the energy as we go along here, it should be obvious that there simply isn't enough energy to support another organism or another species, and so there isn't a 5th component to this food chain. The next question is the 6-mark question, and it compares 2 types of penguin. Now, the key part of this question is that the Gento penguin species evolved from a species that looks similar to the Waimanu, and you have to explain how the Gento penguin species could have evolved from this original different species. This question is basically a 6-mark question on can you explain the process of evolution. So there's a couple of things that you have to be aware of for evolution. This question could come up in a whole variety of forms, and it's a really important part of B2. So the first thing you need for evolution is the idea of variation, the idea that all living organisms aren't the same, and it's variation that allows natural selection to then occur. So in these 2 penguins we have the variation in terms of how streamlined they are. Now what you have to then consider is how a variation or an adaptation could lead to being more successful in part of the food chain, being more successful in competition. So when we talk about animals competing with each other, it could be that they're competing for food, competing for space, competing for a mate, and it's how your adaptation is going to make that more effective. So because these animals are one's more streamlined than the other, that means it's going to be able to travel faster through water, which is the environment in which it lives. So you always want to consider the environment when you're talking about evolution. So because the Gentoo penguin is more streamlined, it's going to be able to catch food more efficiently, but also it's going to be faster at avoiding predators as well. So it's there's 2 sides to this. The more streamlined penguins, therefore, are more likely to survive, both because they've got more opportunity to get food and also more opportunity to survive against predators, and so they are more likely to pass on their genetic information, which is natural selection, survival of the fittest. So when they do pass on their genetic information, the streamlining adaptation will be passed on through the penguin's genes, and then they will be passed from one generation to another. Eventually, the penguins will become so different from their ancestors that they will become a new species on their own. And there's a couple of ways to test that this has happened. Number one, you could test their DNA, and if the DNA was distinctly different over a period of time, then it would indicate a new species. Also, the definition of a species is a group of organisms that are able to reproduce with each other and produce fertile offspring. So if you had a new species produced, it would mean that the Gento penguin would no longer be able to reproduce with the Waimanu penguin and be able to produce fertile offspring. So that would also be an indicator. The next question is on binomial naming, and the question is what is the genus of the Waimanu manaringi? And the genus is the first word in the binomial system, so it's the Waimanu. The second word is the species. So you don't need to know too much about the naming system, but that's one key thing you do need to know. That for the name of an animal, the genus is the first word and the species is the second. This question is about suggest why there was rapid evolution of a new species after the mass extinction that occurred during the dinosaurs that killed off the dinosaurs. And the main reason is because by killing off the dinosaurs, there is now a lack of predators and there is less competition, and this ultimately leads to more food being available. That would be 1 mark. The second mark for this is that there are more niches available, and what we mean by that is that there are more potential safe habitats for mammals and other smaller animals to occupy because they're no longer in fear of the dinosaurs. We now start to compare a different type of bird, and it's talking about why these penguins and the grebes have similarities but they're not closely related. And this is the idea of what we call convergent evolution. So you'd get 1 mark if you put convergent evolution. And what convergent evolution means is that the similarity between these two animals is that they live in the same environment. They both live in water. They both swim. So you would get a mark if you explain that they both live in the same environment. And so therefore, they have to develop, long-term, similar adaptations because they're going to feed in the same way. You'll notice that their beaks are very, very similar. And that's in order so that they can catch fish effectively. And so that's the idea of convergent evolution. The second question is suggest what new evidence could be used to show that penguins and grebes are not closely related. So this is proving again that two animals are not related. And so what I say to my class on this question is that you have to remember that Jeremy Kyle will help you get some marks in your exam. And the idea is that what would he do if he was trying to identify whether two people are related? He would do a DNA test. So you get 1 mark if you've referenced analysing the DNA, and if they are different species and they're not related, then the DNA would not be similar, okay? And that's the key idea, that the DNA wouldn't be the same, and so hence you could tell. Penguins use the counter-current system to keep their feet cool than the rest of their body. Describe how it works. This is just a simple knowledge thing from B2. And the counter-current system is based upon the idea that if you imagine a really simplified diagram, that we've got the inside of the penguin and we have the world's worst drawn foot, right? But as a very simple diagram. Obviously blood has got to flow in and out of the foot. Now the problem is, if we make the blood flow into the foot with all of the heat and it's nice and hot, that heat would then escape the foot and go into the water because the water is much colder than the penguin, and so the penguin would lose heat and that wouldn't be very efficient. So what we do, because the blood going in and out of the foot is going in different directions, the counter current system basically means that heat will be transferred from the warm blood that is leaving the body to the colder blood returning in, so that the warmth stays close to the sort of core of the penguin, and it doesn't lose heat unnecessarily. So the counter current system is when heat is transferred from the warm blood to the cooler blood as it returns from the feet. And that's the end of the B2 section of this exam.